Chapter 1. A Widow in Black. The church bell tolled slow and heavy, each note rolling across the dry plains like thunder before storm. The small crowd gathered at the hilltop cemetery, their boots sinking into loose earth, hats in their hands against the cruel sun. A hot wind tugged at veils and coats, carried with it the faint smell of horses and dust. Clara stood at the head of the grave, her black dress clinging to her frame, the veil over her face trembling with every breath she forced to steady. Her hands were folded tight at her waist, knuckles pale, as the preacher's words droned on. She heard none of them. All she saw was a rough wooden box being lowered into ground, and with it the last tie to the life she thought she had built. A husband, a home, a measure of safety in a land that offered little of either. Just behind her stood Luke Callahan, the younger brother. His tall frame cast a long shadow over the grave, hat pulled low to hide eyes that burned with something more than grief. He shifted his weight, boots crunching on gravel, and for the first time since the service began he spoke, quietly, so only she could hear. "Clara, you won't have to face this alone." She stiffened at the words. Slowly, she turned her head just enough to catch his profile beneath the brim of his hat. Luke had his brother's jawline, the same storm-colored eyes, though harder, roughened by years riding the frontier. "I don't need keepin'," she whispered, her voice sharp even as it trembled. "I've been owned once already." The coffin touched bottom with a thud that seemed to echo through her bones. Clara's throat tightened, and she turned back toward it, refusing to let tears fall in front of the townsfolk who stood watching like crows on a fence. Luke's hand flexed at his side, wanted to reach for her, but he let it fall back against his thigh. "It ain't about owning, Clara. It's about looking out for what's mine to protect." She drew in a slow breath, veil quivering. "Your brother was yours to protect, too." The words cut sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the preacher's final prayer and the shovel scrape as dirt fell over wood. A coyote cried in the distance, lonely and hollow, the sound fading into the wide prairie dusk. When the crowd began to disperse, Clara stayed rooted, staring at the mound of earth. Luke lingered beside her, hat in his hands now, dust settling on his shoulders. "You've got a ranch to run," he said at last, his voice low but steady. "I'll see to it you don't fall under." Her jaw clenched. She turned, eyes flashing beneath the black veil, and said, "I'll run it myself, Luke Callahan. I won't be claimed again, not by you, not by any man." And with that, she walked down the hill, the hem of her dress catching the wind, leaving Luke standing alone by the grave as the sun bled red across the horizon. Chapter 2. The Ranch at Dusk. The Callahan ranch lay quiet under the sinking sun, its fences stretching long and weather-beaten against the horizon. Clara gripped the reins of the wagon with hands rubbed raw from work. Her black sleeves rolled past her elbows. Sweat streaked her brow as she unloaded sacks of feed one by one, her body straining under the weight. The place that once bustled with men's voices and laughter now echoed only with the restless lowing of cattle and the occasional slam of a barn door in the wind. She refused to ask for help. She refused to call on Luke. But as twilight fell, shadows stretched long over the pasture, and Clara noticed a gap in the far fence. Beyond it, a dozen cattle shifted nervously, hoofs kicking up dust. Her chest tightened. If the herd broke, she'd lose everything. "Damn it!" she hissed, dropping the sack with a thud. Before she could climb the fence herself, hoofbeats approached from behind. She stiffened instantly, recognizing the rhythm, measured, heavy, surer. Luke. He reined in beside her, his tall bay horse kicking up dirt as he swung down with practiced ease. Spurs clinked as his boots hit the earth. "Fence is near busted," he said, voice low and matter-of-fact. "Rustlers been testing you. They'll try again." "I can mend a fence," Clara snapped, brushing past him toward the break. "You can try," Luke muttered, striding alongside her. "But one woman can't hold off a pack of thieves." Clara knelt at the post, hands trembling as she tied fresh wire. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a burnished gold. Luke crouched opposite her, his callous fingers moving quick, strong, steady. She tried not to notice the ease with which he handled the wire, the way his presence steadied the cattle nearby. "You don't get it, do you?" she said finally, voice sharp to cover the waver. "I'm not your responsibility. I won't be some burden you carry." Luke's jaw flexed, his eyes catching the last flare of daylight. "Ain't about burden. Ain't about claiming neither. You're family, Clara, and I'll fight for family." She yanked the wire tight, her breath quick, the heat in his tone protective, unyielding, made something stir inside her she didn't want to name. "Family," she repeated, standing and brushing dust from her dress. "That word's just another rope around my neck." The words cut through the evening like a knife. Luke stared at her for a long moment, hat brim shadowing his face. At last, he tipped it low and stepped back toward his horse. "Then you'd best be ready to stand alone when the rustlers come back," he said, mounting up. His horse shifted, eager to move. Clara's heart hammered as she watched him ride off across the darkening field, his silhouette framed against a bleeding sunset. She hated the way his words lingered, hated even more the way she wanted him to stay. Chapter 3. Whiskey and Whispers. The saloon pulsed with noise and smoke, its swinging doors clattering as cowhands came and went. Laughter rose above the twang of a fiddle. Glasses clinked, and the bitter sting of whiskey laced the air. Clara stepped inside, her black dress marking her out among the painted women and dusty men. She felt every gaze shift her way, like sparks of dry kindling. Rumors traveled fast in small towns. By now, everyone knew she'd buried her husband barely a week ago, and everyone whispered that his brother had stepped in to take what was left. At the far end of the room, Luke leaned against the bar, hat tipped back, whiskey in hand. His broad shoulders drew attention, though his eyes stayed fixed on her. Clara walked past him without a glance, head high, every step echoing sharp against the wooden floorboards. She needed supplies, nothing more, but the whispers followed her. "Widow didn't waste time," one man muttered. "Callahan blood runs deep. Reckon the brothers got her now," another said with a chuckle. Heat rushed to Clara's face, but she kept her back straight. Then the sound of boots scuffing behind her. Luke's. "That's enough." His voice cut through the din, low and dangerous. The men laughed, testing him. One shoved Luke's shoulder. "What's it to you, Callahan?" "Widow's fair game now." Before Clara could react, Luke's fist drove into the man's jaw. The crack of bone against bone silenced the saloon, the fiddler halting midstring. The man toppled, chair clattering across the floor. Luke stood over him, fists clenched, breath sharp through his nose. "Anyone else got something to say about her?" His voice was like thunder rolling over the plains. No one answered. Clara's chest rose and fell, fury and shame warring inside her. She stormed out onto the boardwalk, the cool night air biting against her flushed cheeks. Lantern light flickered, throwing her shadow long across the dusty street. Moments later, Luke followed, boots heavy on the planks. "You didn't have to do that," she snapped, spinning on him. "I can fight my own battles." He stepped closer, close enough she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the leather and smoke clinging to him. "No, Clara, you shouldn't have to." Her heart pounded, though she masked it with a glare. "Every time you step in, you make it worse. You make it look like I belong to you." Luke's gaze softened, though his jaw stayed tight. "You don't belong to me, but damned if I'll stand by and let men spit on your name." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the howl of a coyote far off in the hills. The anger in her chest tangled with something hotter, more dangerous. She turned away before he could see it in her eyes. "Stay out of my way, Luke," she said, voice sharp but trembling. Then she walked into the night, leaving him standing under the lantern glow, his shadow long and lonely across the empty street. Chapter 4. Dust and Gunpowder. The evening sun bled red across the plains, staining the horizon like spilled whiskey. A hot wind pushed through the grass, rattling the dry stalks and carrying the scent of dust and iron. Clara stood on the porch of the Callahan ranch house, rifle clutched tight against her shoulder. In the distance, riders approached, a dozen at least, dark silhouettes against the dying light. Rustlers. Her breath came steady, though her palms sweated against the wood. She'd known they'd come back. Luke had warned her, and though she hated the thought of needing him, his horse's pounding hooves sounded behind her now. He rode in hard, dismounting before the animal had even stopped, boots hitting dirt with a thud. "They're making their play tonight," he said, voice clipped, eyes already scanning the horizon. He drew his revolver, spinning the chamber with a practiced flick. "You ready?" Clara's chin lifted. "I was born ready." Luke's gaze lingered on her, black hair pulled back, jaw set like iron, the barrel of the rifle steady in her hands. A widow, yes, but not helpless, not as to guard. For the first time, he saw her as something else entirely, his equal. The riders fanned out, whooping and hollering, firing shots into the air. Bullets struck the fence posts, with splintering. Cattle bawled in the pens, hooves kicking up a storm of dust. "Take the flank," Luke barked, sprinting toward the barn. Clara didn't argue. She ran low, skirts catching the dirt, and took cover behind a water trough. Her rifle cracked, the sound sharp as lightning. One rustler toppled from his saddle, the horse bolting wild into the night. Gunfire lit the dust like fireflies, smoke rising in choking clouds. Luke fired from the barn's shadow, his aim quick, merciless. He was chaos and thunder. Clara was steady as stone, every shot deliberate, measured. Together, they cut the outlaws down, dust and gunpowder mixing in the hot evening air. But one rider broke through, charging straight for the porch. Clara spun, heart-hammering, and fired. Click. Empty. The outlaw's grin widened, pistol raised. Then Luke was there, slamming into him from the side, both men hitting the dirt in a tangle of fists and fury. Clara scrambled, grabbed the drop pistol, and fired. The rustler went limp beneath Luke, dust settling over them both. For a long moment, the world stilled. The last of the riders fled into the hills, leaving silence broken only by the labored breaths of the cattle and the acrid scent of smoke. Luke pushed himself up, dirt smeared across his face, blood trickling from his lip. He looked at Clara, who still held the pistol, chest rising and falling fast. "You saved me," he said, voice hoarse. She swallowed hard, lowering the gun. "No, Luke, we saved each other." The sun slipped fully below the horizon, leaving them in the purple hush of twilight. Two figures standing in the dust, no longer divided by pride, but bound by the fire they had just survived. Chapter 5. A Brand of Her Own. Morning broke pale and sharp over the Callahan ranch, sunlight spilling across the fields still scarred from the fight. Smoke-blackened fence posts stood like sentinels, and the cattle moved nervously, unsettled from the night before. Clara walked the yard with quiet purpose, her skirts dust-stained, her hair tied back, a determined fire in her eyes. The town had wasted no time. By sunrise, whispers had already spread. How Luke Callahan fought off a dozen rustlers to protect his dead brother's wife. How Clara must surely be his now. "A man don't risk his hide for nothing," they'd said. "The widow belongs to Luke." Belongs. That word clung to her like burrs in her dress. Inside the barn, Luke worked silently, hammering new boards into a shattered stall. His knuckles were raw, his shirt torn from last night's brawl. He looked up when Clara stepped in, but she didn't speak. She went straight to the branding iron hanging on the wall. "What are you doing?" Luke asked, his brow furrowed. Clara lifted the iron, its weight heavy in her grip. She carried it to the fire pit, her jaw tight, and shoved it deep into the glowing embers. Sparks flared, the hiss loud in the still air. "They all think I'm yours now," she said. Her voice steady though her hands trembled. "That you fought for me because you meant to claim me." Luke dropped the hammer, dusting his hands. "Clara, I won't be branded like stock, Luke. Not by you. Not by any man." The iron's tip glowed red-hot, smoke curling upward. Clara strode past him out into the pasture, every step fierce. She drove the iron into the nearest fence post, with hissing and smoking as it burned. The mark was crude, uneven, but it was hers. She pressed the iron to another post, then another, her arms shaking with effort, her chest heaving. "This is my land," she declared, voice rising against the wind. "My cattle, my fight. The only brand that matters is the one I set with my own hands." Luke stood frozen, watching her, dust swirling between them. For once, he had no quick answer, no fire in his tone. He saw not the widow he thought needed protecting, but a woman carving her own place into the earth. Clara pulled the iron free and let it fall, steam rising from the scarred post. She turned to him, eyes blazing beneath the morning sun. "I'll not be owned, Luke Callahan. If you want me, it won't be as property. It'll be as an equal or not at all." The silence after her words was heavier than gun smoke. Luke's lips parted, but he shut them again, swallowing hard. For the first time, the cowboy who'd never backed down from a fight realized this was one he couldn't win by force. He could only win it by letting go. Chapter 6. Love at Sundown. The prairie stretched wide and endless, bathed in the orange glow of evening. The sun hung low, bleeding fire across the horizon, while long shadows of corral rails stretched like prison bars across the dirt. Luke Callahan leaned against one of those rails, his hat pulled low, his hands busy running a brush down the flank of his horse. The animal snorted softly, flicking its tail against the settling flies. It had been 3 days since Clara had taken the branding iron to her fences, staking her independence in fire and smoke. Luke hadn't spoken much since then. He worked the ranch by day, kept himself by night, the distance between them growing heavier than the desert heat. But tonight, Clara came to him. Her steps were quiet, her dress catching the breeze as she crossed the yard. She paused at the fence, watching him in the fading light. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence filled with the lowing of cattle and the lonely call of a coyote somewhere out on a ridge. "You're awful quiet lately," Clara said at last, her voice softer than she meant it to be. Luke set the brush down, leaning both arms on the fence. "Figure you didn't want me underfoot no more." Her throat tightened. She remembered the look on his face as she branded those posts. Hurt pride, yes, but something deeper too. A man torn between duty and desire, between protecting and letting go. Clara stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on the rail. "I didn't mean to push you off. Luke, I needed you to see me. Not as your brother's widow. Not as someone to keep safe. Just me." Luke's eyes lifted to hers, the dying sun turning them the color of smoldering coals. "I see you, Clara. Always have. But I didn't know how to want you without holding too tight." Her chest ached at the raw honesty in his tone. She reached across the fence, her fingers brushing his wrist, rough with calluses and scars. "Then don't hold me, Luke. Stand with me." For a long heartbeat, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he climbed the rail, landing on her side of the fence. Dust swirled at his boots as he stepped toward her. He took off his hat, letting it hang at his side, his other hand lifting hesitantly, until she leaned into it, her cheek brushing against his palm. The tension between them, stretched thin for so long, finally broke. He pulled her close, not as a man claiming, but as a man choosing, and as a woman choosing him back. Their lips met beneath the crimson sky, the world around them fading into silence but for the steady beat of their hearts. When they pulled apart, Clara's eyes glistened with the fire of dusk. "I'll never be owned, Luke Callahan," she whispered. His thumb brushed her cheek, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. "Good. I don't want a thing to own, just a woman to ride beside me." And as the sun sank into the horizon, the two of them stood in the quiet glow, partners at last, bound not by chains but by choice, in a love as wild and unbroken as the frontier itself. The sun slipped low over the plains, setting the horizon ablaze with red and gold. The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush, whispering through the tall grass that bent like waves across the prairie. From the ranch house porch, Clara watched the land she had fought to keep, her land, her freedom, bathed in the glow of twilight. Behind her came the sound of boots on creaking boards. Luke stepped up, hat in hand, the dust of a long day clinging to him. For once, he didn't try to fill the silence. He only stood beside her, gaze fixed on the fading light. "You built something worth standing for," he said softly, voice low like a prayer. Clara's chest tightened. She turned to him, searching the face that had been a storm and a shelter both. "I don't need a man to hold me up, Luke." His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "I know, but maybe you let me stand with you." For a moment, the wind and the world held still. Then Clara reached for his hand, fingers intertwining with his. Not bound, not claimed, chosen. They stood together as the last light slipped beneath the hills, horses nickering in the distance, saloon music drifting faintly from town. Clara leaned against him, her voice barely above the wind. "We'll ride this land together, free as the sky." And with the prairie stretching endless before them, they stepped into the night, not as owner and owned, but as partners, their love as wild and unbroken as the frontier itself.